Sabado na naman at alas 7 na naman po ng gabi. Minsan pa nagbabalik po inyong lingkod, Angelique Lazo. Ngayong gabi po kapiling natin ang Commissioner ng NYC at mukhang wala po rito ngayon si Chairman Richie Nalupta, si Commissioner Dino Badilla kasama po natin. Hello Dino and welcome back to our program Youth Voice.
Yes, magandang gabi Angelique at magandang gabi sa lahat ng ating mga nanonood ngayong gabi.
Pakilala na rin natin ang ating isa pang bisita. Commissioner naman po representing Mindanao, Muhammad Hani Kamid. Magandang gabi sa iyo, Commissioner.
Magandang gabi rin, Angelique, Dino, sa mga nanonood. Magandang gabi po.
Okay, mamaya, update mo kami sa mga ginagawa ng NYC sa Mindanao.
Opo.
Ngayon naman siguro nagtatanong ang ating mga manonood, nasan nga ba si Chairman Richie Nalupta ngayong gabi?
Oh, last week magkasama kami sa China, sa isang
Balita ko, amoy China ka.
sa isang ASEAN meeting for tourism and culture. Tapos maaga siyang bumalik ng Pilipinas kasi maraming meeting sa kailangan puntahan. Mukhang napasunod-sunod at hindi na nakapagpahinga, kaya ayun, nagkasakit.
Ayan, so I'm sure he's watching tonight. Kaya dyan ka lang, Chairman Richie, at marami kang mapupulot muli ng mga butil ng kaalaman mula sa ating mga debaters. And speaking of our debaters, pakilala na po natin ang mga magtutunggaling eskwelahan ngayong gabi from the Ateneo de Manila University at the University of Santo Tomas. Okay, this time from the Ateneo nga po, representing the government, narito po ang ating mga debaters. The Prime Minister tonight shall be Miko Boscocho. Ayan. Deputy Prime Minister is Tuazon at ang government whip ay si De Castro.
Siyempre, sa side naman ng opposition ng University of Santo Tomas, ang
Ating leader of opposition,
si Eric Javeloza.
Okay.
Ang deputy leader of the opposition is Cyris ng. At siyempre, ang opposition whip ay si Judilyn Sison.
Okay. At ngayon po alamin na natin mula sa ating moderator ang motion for tonight. Narito po si Attorney Mark Castro. Mark?
Thank you, Ms. Angelique, Dino, and sa lahat ng ating tagapanood. Tonight, we will be debating on a topic na narinig na natin itong over the last few episodes we had in this program. Ito ay ginamit minsan sa negative na dapat tayong matakot at minsan din itong term na ito ay ginamit na para suportahan natin itong case ng side nitong debate natin. So tonight, we will go deep into understanding how this system works. The system I'm talking about is the vote of no confidence. It's a key feature in a parliamentary form of government. So the motion for tonight reads, this House believes that the vote of no confidence should be appreciated and not feared. Back to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Attorney Mark Castrades. At ngayon, alamin natin kay Commissioner Kamid kung ano naman ang mga pinagkakabalahan nila sa NYC pagdating sa Mindanao.
Salamat, Angelique. No? Right now, we are busy preparing for the first Mindanao Environmental Youth Summit. This will be held in Cagayan de Oro City on October 6 to 8. That's why I'm inviting all the youth leaders, my fellow youth leaders in Mindanao, and SKs of Mindanao to please join us.
Environment Summit, ibig sabihin tungkol sa kagubatan, sa mga ilog, sa
Opo,
karagatan.
the highlight of this summit will be our declaration in preserving, conservation, and protection of our environment. That will be presented to the Secretary Reyes and to Her Excellency President Arroyo.
So, Commissioner Kamil, ito yung related sa programa ng Presidente, yung Berdeng Pilipinas, di ba?
Opo.
Oo, dahil ang Mindanao, masasabi natin, one of the last frontiers na lang yan ng ating bansa, di ba?
Yes.
Maraming salamat sa iyo, Commissioner.
Maraming salamat.
Okay. So, samantala po, mga kaibigan, narinig nyo na po ang ating bisita si Commissioner, narinig nyo na rin po ang ating proposition. Mamaya naman, ang ating mga debaters sa pagbabalik po ng ating programang Youth Voice. Okay, nagbabalik po ang ating programang Youth Voice and minsan pa ang ating pong proposal or motion for tonight is this House believes that the vote of no confidence should be appreciated and not feared. Ito kasing parliamentary system, Dino, merong built-in checks and balances, di ba? Built-in sa na sistema or feature na tinitingnan kung ano nga ba, nagpa-function pa ba ng maayos, may kumpiyansa pa ba ang mga mamamayan sa mga namumuno sa ating bansa.
Siyempre, yung mga taong bayan, gusto nila na bawat opisyal na binoto nila at naging parliamentarian, kailangan gampanan yung trabaho na legislative at syempre yung pag-execute ng mga polisiya.
So dalawa po, twofold. Ngayon po ating alamin mula sa ating mga debaters kung ano yung pros and cons nga ba ng feature na ito. Narito na po si Attorney Mark Castro.
Let's begin. I call this House to order. We invite the Prime Minister, Mr. Miko Boscocho from the Ateneo, to open this debate.
Ladies and gentlemen, imagine that we, the Philippines, have adopted a parliamentary form of government wherein the executive and legislative branches are fused into one and the Prime Minister is the head of state. Essentially, what the debate today will be about is a very specific aspect of parliamentary governments, and that is the vote of no confidence. Essentially, what this means is a change in governance and leadership at that particular time. And what we want on government bench is to have a modified United Kingdom model, meaning that the opposition in parliament will initiate a vote among the members, and if a majority of 50% plus one of the members acquiesce or agree to the vote of no confidence, the Prime Minister and the members of cabinet of that particular parliament will get removed. And upon that happening, either of two things can happen. One is that with the vote of no confidence, a vote of confidence happens for a replacement of the Prime Minister from among the ministers in Parliament already present, or number two, there will be a dissolution of Parliament called for by the Prime Minister, whereby there will be another general election to have a new set of ministers of Parliament and from there elect a new Prime Minister. Essentially, we say that in our policy, such kinds of vote of no confidence can happen every 6 months, meaning that the opposition will have the incentive to not waste their shot at being able to remove the Prime Minister with a vote of no confidence. We say that the vote of no confidence is something that isn't fickle. In fact, over the past 300 years or so, since 1762, when the vote of no confidence was initiated in Britain, only 26 prime ministers have ever been removed from the vote of no confidence, with the most recent being Prime Minister Yanukovych of Ukraine and Prime Minister Paul Martin of Canada. Essentially, the theme of government bench will be this, that the vote of no confidence is easily available when needed, but indeed there are internal checks and balances to make sure that it is not abused. And to answer this theme, there are two questions that we will try to resolve. The first is essentially, how do you maintain a high level of government accountability at all times? And second is, how do you ensure good governance that is sustainable at the end of the day? And with that, I'll give two reasons or two arguments. The first is that the government has to remain mindful and accountable to public trust as manifested or represented in Parliament. And second, I'll prove to you that even in times when the vote of no confidence actually doesn't happen, in majority of the times it won't happen, there is still benefit to good governance at the end of the day. The first argument then, on how the government has to remain mindful and accountable to public trust. Let's look at what is happening in status quo or in present times. Essentially, we characterize the current scenario as the president is actually very secure, meaning that in order to have impeachment, in order for the president to be removed within the bounds of the system, there has to happen a lot of things before the impeachment actually commences. You have to have investigation. There has to be a certain level of proof established. The impeachment has to be transmitted to the Senate from the Congress first. A lot of things and nitty-gritty items that have to happen. However, we say that the reality of it is, and the principle should be, that these criteria shouldn't be present even. And we say that this is because in some instances, the replacement of leaders, while not pinpointable to a specific action, actually results from a lack of trust of the constituents, meaning that the people do not believe that the president is capable, or in this case, the prime minister is still capable, in a while, sir, is still capable of being able to govern the nation. Or in some instances, like in the case of Paul Martin of Canada, the leadership or the government is just incompetent, Meaning, even if its heart is in the right place, even if it has good intentions, the fact that its policies have failed and the fact that the lives of the people, the Filipinos, have still not improved over time means that there is a need for the leadership to be changed. And we say that in this scenario, we have to look at the basis for removal and the ease by which prime ministers can be removed. But before I go on, yes, Cyris.
More often than not, this process is highly political as opposed to judicial. And second of all, the trust with government and with the leader is often changing. That's why you have polls saying that sometimes the trust is high, sometimes it's low.
Ladies and gentlemen, there is nothing necessarily wrong about a system being political. Obviously, it's politics, it's governance, and even in status quo with impeachment, it's still political. We say that the difference is essentially when people don't have trust for the person at the head of government, we say that they should be entitled and Parliament should be empowered to be able to change the system of governance and essentially to make sure that the people who are in power have the confidence of the people. And this is something that can more easily be gained when indeed there is the twin bill of someone replacing the Prime Minister or of having general elections with a fresh mandate ensured for the ministers or for the members of Parliament. And we say that this is good because indeed it forwards the principle of maintaining support for the government at all times and also lessening tension or being able to answer to public sympathy or public frustration that indeed the leaders or the president cannot be removed easily and cannot be removed even when there is just cause. And with that, I end my speech.
Thank you very much, Mr. Prime Minister Boscocho. That was a very clear laying down of what this debate will be all about for the rest of this evening. Now, to interpolate the Prime Minister, I'd like to invite the Leader of the Opposition, Eric Javeloza.
I only have two basic interpolations for the first speaker. First is the idea of uncertainty. Do you agree that politicians desire to serve in government as long as they could and they want?
For most of them, probably yes, but there are checks and balances. Like the replacement will always be there, or they can also be dissolved, meaning that the opposition can also be removed from Parliament if the Prime Minister feels that there is no just cause.
Do you then agree that the vote of no confidence actually threatens their sense of security of stay in office?
For the Prime Minister, yes, there is always the dangling threat of that, and we say that's a good thing because that's an incentive for him or her to perform well.
Then, do you agree, therefore, that these politicians might make decisions in government that might serve their political career rather than national interest for the interest of preserving their place in power?
We think that you shouldn't downplay the capability of the Filipino people to see the difference between the two, between an action that is just happening out of own political career moving, or indeed the national interest being upheld. So, there.
Let me go on to my second interpolation. Do you agree that the vote of no confidence, like impeachment, is much of a political process?
Yeah, we think that an action like this, obviously something that happens within the realm of politics and governance, will always have that level of being political. And you haven't yet proven why that necessarily is wrong.
Since you concede that it is a political process, then you also concede that a leader might be removed, not based on his competence, but based on the simple reason that he's not friends with the majority of members of parliament.
Not really, but more the manifestation of public trust. And it has happened in Philippine culture, like in the past EDSAs, wherein even if there was no impeachment, when the public trust and sympathy was lost, the president can be removed.
But then again, if he does not have support of parliament, for a simple reason that he's not friends with them, do you agree then that the vote of no confidence is not actually a good tool to hold people accountable?
No, we think that it is still a good tool precisely because there is still that check and balance for the members of the opposition to make sure that there is just cause and that they don't just thickly waste all of their shots at removing the Prime Minister in power.
Thank the Prime Minister for answering the interpellation questions. The Leader of the Opposition may now proceed with his constructive.
Basically, opposition will carry a single theme. Our problem with the vote of confidence is the idea of uncertainty and the kind of pressures it places on our leaders in terms of when they make decision-making processes. I basically have two cases. First, my first case is when this principle of vote of no confidence forces elected leaders to place their political careers, priorities, before and above people's interest. We base it on the premise that under the vote of no confidence, a leader has to woo and court the support of members of parliament for him to continue his government. the greater danger in this particular paradigm is that a leader might make concessions to politicians, not based on national interest, but based on the gathering that politicians support for his stay in government. Example, ladies and gentlemen, if we need, for example, 150 million pesos to resuscitate our healthcare system or renovate and upgrade our hospitals, just because the elected leader, the prime minister, want to stay in power, he might not give money instead to a congressman to renovate his municipal hall in province. And we say that is a problem because funds must be allocated based on national interest and not on national policies. A second problem also from this paradigm is the fact that, ladies and gentlemen and members of this House, the Prime Minister has no uncertainty how long he will stay in office. And he might be afraid of making decisions that may actually go against the support of politicians, but it actually is desired and required by national interest. Secondly, we argue, ladies and gentlemen and members of the House, is that based on the premise that we actually are a country that require long-term reforms, we say this particular policy of vote of no confidence actually shortens the window for government to implement much-needed long-term reforms. And we say this is a problem, especially, ladies and gentlemen, when we realize that we live in a third-world country that actually needs long-term reforms to solve problems that had already been existing and entrenched in our society. For example, the problem of corruption, revenue collection, the improvement of education and transportation. These are problems that cannot be resolved overnight and requires a long-term presence of a leader to be successfully implemented. For example, ladies and gentlemen, is our transportation system and its upgrade specifically of the railway system. In the status quo, the government has been successful in acquiring loans from foreign and local banks in implementing its policy. And this Gloria is primarily responsible to oversee this project. If tomorrow Gloria was removed, what happens to this project? Will these be scrapped? Will this be scrapped, ladies and gentlemen? Will we actually default on our international obligations to pay these debts? And we see that is the problem and uncertainty that the vote of no confidence brings to governmental operations. Before I go on, yes.
Sir, favor-seeking will always be present in any system. The question is, where do you empower the politicians who precisely want to go against that kind of system and replace prime ministers who espouse that?
You empower these politicians, ladies and gentlemen, by not threatening their tenure and term in office, by assuring them, ladies and gentlemen, members of this House, that for the next 6 years, for example, they are in the seat of power to continue the policies that they themselves implemented and actually made possible. And we say, ladies and gentlemen, that is the greater interest that we are trying to protect. We say, ladies and gentlemen, when you talk about governmental operations, they must be given certainty for them to fully realize their intentions and potentials. That is something, ladies and gentlemen, that the vote of no confidence threatens because it places and forces people, leaders who have been elected in power, to make sure that at the back of their mind, their security in their seat of power will always be the primary concern when you talk about making these decisions. And there is a possibility that long-term implementations of projects might be jeopardized by a simple vote or lack of majority of parliament. With that, we open the debate for the University of San Tomas. Thank you.
We thank the leader of the opposition for providing the clash this debate needs. To interpellate the leader of the opposition, we would like to request the Deputy Prime Minister.
Just a simple yes or no question. Are you aware that in a parliamentary system, that as a parliament or as a prime minister is removed from office by a vote of no confidence, that he can dissolve parliament as well when he is removed from office?
Yes, I'm aware of that.
Okay, so don't you think that this kind of system is actually a disincentive for the members of opposition to actually just be trigger happy with removing the prime minister?
Not exactly, because if you dissolve the parliament, you must have a general election. And the same people who was in the previous government might be elected by the virtue of the fact that they are members of the same party that might be elected into a majority.
But come to think about it, we want to talk about political turncoatism as well, because people want to punish politicians that just jump on which boat is floating the best. Don't you think that because of these re-elections, after the vote of no confidence, that people will now have the chance to punish the politicians that are actually turncoatists?
Not exactly. I think that in your paradigm, you're even aggravating the problem of political turncoatism because these politicians need to woo the power or party that has the greater number in terms of population. So if this party has this greater voting power, they will go to that regardless of that party's ideologies and beliefs.
Speaking of favors, and this is a good segue, no? Don't you agree that there are political favors in your system and our system?
Yes, but I think those problems will be minimized by the fact that the leader feel that there is security in his term and tenure in office.
But wait, aren't you also talking about why that there are already political favors in the system that we have right now? The question that I want to pose is this. Given the light that there are some politicians that want to go against the people who are only seeking political favors, don't you think our system will empower the people more who want to punish these people by having them a vote, giving them a vote of no confidence?
I think your alleged benefit would not be realized because these people are not even actually directly electing and removing these people in power, but they are acting through their representatives who might misbehave or who might not misbehave. Who knows?
Last
Thank
question.
you very much. We thank the Leader of the Opposition for answering the questions. Before we hear the constructive speech of the Deputy Prime Minister, let's go back to Angelique and Commissioner Badilla.
Alright, welcome back to Youth Voice. Ito po yung mga lingkod, Angelique Lazo, together with Commissioner Dino Badilla tonight. Pansamantala po sa upuan ni Chairman Richie Lalupta. Get well soon, Chairman Richie. And again, our motion is this House believes that the vote of no confidence should be appreciated and not feared. Marami kasing mga natatakot, no? Dito sa feature na ito ng parliamentary system.
Siyempre, iniisip nila na baka palagi na lang may eleksyon, palagi na lang nagtatanggal ng
Didissolve na naman
parliament.
ng parliament.
Mas napaka-unstable ng ating politika. Parang hindi na tayo nasanay, ano,
Hindi na
Angelique?
tayo susulong. Gusto nating marinig ngayon din, syempre from the government side, ng mga debaters from the Ateneo de Manila, kung bakit hindi dapat ito katakutan at kung bakit ito ay safe feature po ng parliamentary system. Balikan na po natin si Attorney Mark.
I thought, ladies and gentlemen, the first two speeches, constructive speeches, were very good. And let's see now how the next constructive speeches would bring this debate to a higher level. Let's welcome the Deputy Prime Minister, Glenn Tuazon.
Here.
Ladies and gentlemen, UST talked about negative political culture in the Philippines, how there can be wanton abuse of the system, how there can be pandering towards personal interest. But I want to talk about why the vote of no confidence precisely is the very tool that can curb these negative political cultures. Because they claim that there can be a pandering to personal interests of the politicians. But that argument assumes that this kind of vote of no confidence will be wantonly abused by those people who can forward it. But in fact, let's talk about the abuse of the system, why it's something that is not necessarily there if you have the vote of no confidence. Because people can't be trigger happy because of the dual check and balance that exists within the system. Meaning, if a prime minister is voted out because of a vote of no confidence, he will also have the option to dissolve parliament and call for another general elections. Meaning, whenever politicians decide to act on their self-interest to remove the prime minister, they also, their tenures will also be put on the chopping block as well. What does this mean? It means that if the opposition becomes trigger happy with a vote of no confidence, meaning if they just become filibusters instead of real check and balancers, or if they become political turncoatists and they just go where, as I said before, where the ship is floating the best, then when this kind of dissolution of parliament comes about, then they can be punished as well because there will be another set of elections where the people cannot vote in anymore, the same people who might have been turncoatists or filibusters. Meaning, but if that kind of vote of no confidence is valid, they can be reinstated in office, and that is the kind of check and balance that we're talking about. We're going to reward the people who use the system well and use the system within its bounds. That is why, when you talk about the general elections, and I bet they're going to talk about that elections will be expensive, elections will be a waste of time and a waste of money, it's almost just going to be like the one we have today, where we have elections every 3 years right now. I don't think expense will be a big issue, and expense, again, is not a sufficient excuse to keep incompetent people in government if you have that kind of argument at hand. Before I go on to my second argument, wherein, in cases where the vote of no confidence fails, there is still a value in it, I want to take a point of information.
Since you concede that you actually need checks and balance to make this policy of yours work, do you concede then that you actually make the government more retaliatory and confrontational in nature?
No, precisely because this is what I want to question against these guys. Because they seem to assume that political favors or personal interests are mutually exclusive from national interest. In fact,
when you have politicians who want to just keep their tenure because they just keep giving favors to other politicians, that is not a sustainable system because they can be turned over by another politician that gives the same but better favors to another politician. But if you act in the national interest, which will affect everyone, which will make the country better and which will be beneficial for all, then that is the kind of favor that will be best for everyone and will best keep their tenure more stable. Let's talk about the second argument. The vote of no confidence, let's say it fails, because it can fail. And we talked about it failing a lot because there has been only 26 politicians removed by the vote of no confidence in 1789 or 1786. Let's talk about how that very system of the vote of no confidence can be an incentive for governments to make their jobs better, to institute better policies, to be more respondent to the needs of the people, to be more respondent to the needs of the populace. And in fact, let's talk about another political culture that is curbed here. Because let's talk about the rally culture of the Filipinos. How, if you look at EDSA or rallies seeking to remove heads of state from government, it can be good, but it shouldn't be abused. But why do people always rally all the time? Because they seek to intervene in a system where they feel there is no chance for that leader to be removed, within the present system. That is why what we want is to give the people a system or an assurance that this system will work. If not only for removing the person, but also pressuring them to work the best or not be too secure in the kind of long political tenure that is practically secure in the current system that we have right now. And if the people, again, like what we were talking about earlier, want to have that kind of system or want to keep the pressure on the government or want improvements in the kinds of policies that are forwarded, then they still have input through directly elected members of parliament vis-a-vis in the status quo where you have senators who are not directly accountable to the region or to the populace as opposed to MPs in a parliamentary system. That is why, in the end, when you talk about negative political cultures, it will always exist in their system and in ours. The question is, which kind of policy will curb these negative political cultures better? And with this, Ateneo de Manila closes this part of the debate, and we...
Ladies and gentlemen, let's test the Deputy Prime Minister with the interpellation of the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, Cyris Nang.
I credit your very humanistic perception of politicians, but just a simple yes or no question. What makes you so sure that the ability to dissolve the whole government is not something that the Prime Minister can use in retaliation for voting against his stay?
First of all, good evening, Cyris. Second, I don't think the question can be answered by a yes or no. But in fact, maybe let's talk about the cultures, which was something I've been talking about earlier. That politicians, yes, can work within their own political favor, can work within their personal interest. But again, these personal interests are not necessarily mutually exclusive from national interests.
I think that means a yes. Second question. Why do you think that, don't you agree that the reason why EDSA 1 happened was because people didn't feel they were able to participate with the process of selecting their leadership?
Not necessarily. Well, not necessarily. I think it's just a matter of they don't think the current system can solve their need to remove the current government.
Don't you agree in the second plank that EDSA 2 wasn't because they didn't feel that the current mechanism was fair, but because the current system, which was judicial, was bastardized?
Not necessarily as well, Cyris. I think it's also another loss of faith in the system. Because remember, EDSA 2 happened on the eve after the 11-10 vote was actually instituted by Senate.
Yes, which was a disrespect to the judicial system. Meaning if the government was able to follow the system properly, people would actually respect the paradigm, even if it took a long time. So on both questions, you answered yes.
Cool.
Thank you.
We thank the Deputy Prime Minister for his constructive and answering the questions. Now let's see how the Deputy Leader of the Opposition responds to his constructive. Now the constructive of the Deputy Leader, Cyris Nang.
Before I move on to my constructive, allow me to first make people realize this value that affirmative side is standing for. He tells us that, you know what, if they won't push through and they won't be very fickle in forwarding the process of removing someone in office because it affects them whether it wins or loses. But we tell you that there is a very big propensity for people who do not agree with the leadership to move forward, especially if the idea that they are forwarding is populist in nature. Meaning if there will still be a re-election and the Prime Minister can retaliate by removing them from office, since they harbor a popular sentiment, meaning the current leadership is unfair, then it will be very easy for them to actually have mandate and win the elections, even if they have to do it over again. And before I move on, and now allow me to move on with my constructive, I will argue two fundamental issues. We tell you that there will be a huge danger of hurting the functions of government. And second, you affect the people with regards to how they trust the government and the system that we have. Something this side of the house is purely neglecting. On my first case, Glenn here comes up here and tells us, you know what, money shouldn't be an issue at all. But you have to look at the country where this is in. This isn't a first world country where there are emergency funds you can use whenever you want to. In a third world government where people are very critical of how they use their money, we tell you that the budget is a very big thing. Especially if you allow the probability of every 6 months something like a national election is going to happen. If you look at it, ladies and gentlemen, what does the vote of no confidence produce? We say that there's a huge possibility of dissolving parliament, and this is something particularly dangerous. Although we concede that there is value in attaining mandate, we say that the exchange of it is too big. We say elections themselves take a lot of money from government. And we say that if you look even at politicians trying to run for re-election, at the very least, they need 5 million pesos, Mr. Chair and members of this House. And we say that this is very dangerous. The loss is very grave for a third world nation.
Point.
Let's assume, ladies and gentlemen, that there will something like this will happen. There is a loss bigger than the finances, something for the people and the politicians. If you look at politicians after this, you give them a reason to promote this sense of constant corruption within their system because there is a threat that any time they will have to go for re-election and use a lot of money to win the campaign. And you give impetus for politicians to go and be bad. And we don't like that in the system. Second, for the government, you allow the government to actually run. You make the government refocus because you cripple their functions, Mr. Chair and members of this House. You stop the discussion of laws, you rechannel funds. And this is something very dangerous if you're talking about a government that is extremely cash-strapped. These are things that have repercussions to the people and not just the government, sir.
Your entire case, Cyris, assumes that there will be votes of no confidence instituted every 6 months. We talked about disincentives for that to happen. Second, don't you think impeachment trials actually tie in the senators even more from not doing their job because of all of these investigations?
No, impeachments, even though they are happening, they do happen for sure very rarely because the bureaucratic process makes sure that it doesn't happen at the toss of a hat, Mr. Chair and members of this House. Second, allow me to argue that for the people, this is something very detrimental. We argue that it is integral for people to have belief not just in the politicians, but in the process and the democratic system itself. We tell you first, on both paradigms, if you make someone lose, and inevitably there's a huge possibility of re-election, we tell you that inevitably you make people listen to a lot of rhetoric over and over again because you open the possibility of elections to happen over and over again. You hear lots of promises, and we argue that people are very cynical when you're talking about promises, especially as argued by my teammate, it takes a while for these promises to come true. Second, assuming that they just get replaced or they don't get replaced at all, we say that there is a frustration on people because they feel that there is some sort of tyranny reminiscent of Marcos, wherein they no longer feel they have a hand in changing their leadership, something they feel they deserve. On both paradigms, it leads to distrust and the possibility of non-participation in government functions. So at the end of the day, we say that given the possibility of a lot of elections going on and a lot of politicking going on, you shouldn't give the government that opportunity because there's a possibility of misuse, something that hurts people in the long run. Thank you.
We thank the Deputy Leader of the Opposition for a constructive. Now let's have the last interpellation for this match to be done by the Government Whip, Danny De Castro.
From your speech, you declared that politicking is inherent in Philippine political culture.
Yes.
So does the politicking have some attribution to the political system that we operate on?
Inevitably, as what Glenn conceded, politicking is going to happen in either paradigms. What our paradigms assures us is that people who would otherwise go against the tide of popular and politicking have the opportunity because they are not strapped with time. So they have the benefit of time to forward their own ideals even if it is not popular.
The system that the parliamentary form of government wants is a sort of indefinite term for the Prime Minister, in that the Prime Minister stays in power for as long as the confidence is reassured upon him. Is that right?
Correct.
Then given that the political platforms in the Philippines are based on public sentiment plus personal interest, and the person is not given a vote of no confidence, does that mean that he's able to, in a certain way and to a minimum extent, serve the people's interests?
At a minimal, of course, you can't deny that popular issues and something that media will show will have a positive effect on people. But in terms of issues that aren't popular, maybe agricultural, maybe in rural areas, these things won't be prioritized if you allow people to remove a leader by virtue of because something is popular, because not all national concerns are popular concerns.
So with particular legislations, is it important for the government to be able to fight against even popular interests if they feel that it is with the best interest of the development of the country?
Yes, but the fact that you have a limited time period and you can easily get rid of someone if they show that they are not promoting a popular sentiment, then that makes the propensity of these people making long-term projects something unlikely because they'll just follow what the trend is.
Thank you very much, Deputy Leader of the Opposition. Before we hear the last two speeches for this match, let's give this back to Angelique and Commissioner Badilla.
Okay, thank you very much. Ako si Attorney Mark Estrades at Commissioner Dino, narinig natin ang Deputy Prime Minister, ang Deputy Leader of Opposition, at yun nga, nag-interpolate na po ang Government Whip. At meron pang last round, no? Pero anong nakita mo dito sa second round na to?
Talagang pareho sila, talagang mainit yung sagupaan nila sa issue, lalong-lalo na pareho din naman sila gusto na magkaroon ng pagbabago, magkaroon ng mas mabilis na proseso, mas maayos na pagkaka-implement ng mga polisiya.
Ayan, okay. So meron pa akong pag-wrap up ng ating mga debaters sa pagbabalik po yan ng ating programang Youth Voice. Okay, mawawala. Alright, welcome back to Youth Voice. Alam niyo, during the gap kami ni Commissioner Dino rito, nagdedebate rin kung ano ba, nakonvince ka na ba? Hindi ka ba nakonvince, di ba? Kasi, totoo nga po, every 6 months pwedeng magkaroon ng eleksyon.
Eleksyon,
And
siyempre.
alam mo naman natin, sobrang gastusin ng eleksyon.
Saka lahat kasali doon, lahat ng taong bayan, kasali doon sa pagdidesisyon na yan.
Pero at the same time, ano pinagkaiba naman sa pagkakaroon ng mga impeachment na nabibinbin din po ang pagtatalakay sa mga mahalagang legislative, mga bills na nakasampa po sa legislatura. Well, anyway, tingnan po natin kung paano po aayusin at tatapusin ng ating mga debaters from the Ateneo de Manila at ng University of Santo Tomas ang paksa ngayong gabi. Balikan po natin si Attorney Mark Estrades.
Before you, our viewer, make the final decision on whose side is the superior side for this match, let's hear the last two speeches for this match. First, the closing speech for the government. Ms. Danny De Castro, the Government Whip.
Ladies and gentlemen, there are grounds and prerequisites to be considered for a government to be changed and for a government procedure to be able to push forward into the new millennium. But when we have to consider particular procedures, there are a few clarifications that we must make with regards to the presidential role, or in this case, the Prime Minister's role in the Philippine government to be. We have to ask the questions. How exactly should the leaders be replaced when they are deemed insufficient, and how should the system actually facilitate this change? And secondly, how should leaders be removed? What is the procedure for this to happen? Should it be through a grave manifestation of public betrayal, or should it be a regular check to facilitate democratic ideals? Before I go on to my issues here in this debate, let's take a look at the things that we must consider coming from the opposition side. First, we have the leader of opposition talking about how, in his first argument, we have to have an avenue that forces leaders to prioritize particular national interests over their prioritized or particularistic interests. We say that we question the basis of support when they're talking about the distinction between national interest and personal interest. Because as politicians, it is their responsibility to be able to somehow manifest their particular political ideals into making a system that serves the people. At the end of the day, it still has to trickle down to the people. Whether the effects be minimal or incremental, we say that it's important for their particular interests to still reflect what they feel is important for the public. Next, we have to question this idea of a time period and a constraint. When we question this as whether it is going to be positive or negative in the long run. Because if you have to have a time period placed upon a person, that limits the amount of change that they can make. I'll take you in a moment. And that limits the amount, the quantity of change that they're actually going to be able to allocate in legislation. But we say that it's important for this type of government, the parliamentary form of government, to have this procedure that only allows for there to be a change if there is an obvious disregard of this particular person in leadership, the Prime Minister. We say that the constraint that's put upon him is to be able to continuously serve the people and gain the respect of the people that he works with, primus inter pares, as what they say. But before I go on, yes.
An example of an unpopular but absolutely necessary measure was the imposition of an additional value-added tax, which was opposed by businessmen and the massa alike, but was sorely needed to cure budget deficit. If the President was afraid of the vote of no confidence, she might not have pushed through with this policy, but it was absolutely necessary. So we see that the vote of confidence cripples the functions of government.
It's a structural adjustment program requirement from the International Monetary Fund. But other than that, we say that it was important to look at the necessity of this particular procedure. Even if it was a bit shaky to begin with, we could see that this was really towards a goal that the government and the Philippines needs to have solved, that of our budget constraints and deficits. But to move on with my rebuttals, with regards to long-term reforms, I think the opposition side assumes that just because a leader in the particular government is taken out, the changes that this particular person advocated will not follow suit. But we have to talk about the issue of regimes and how there is continuity in governance with regards to goals, with regards to the motto and the mission and vision that the government actually has at the end of the day, with prioritizing which is going to be best for the Filipino people. We don't question who is in power, but we question the motives that this power actually has into sustaining a better environment and quality of life for the Filipinos. Which actually leads me to my issues when I talk about what is best for the Philippines here at the end of the day. First issue is on political stability and succession. Second is on suitability for facilitating the Philippine political culture in a form of government. The first issue questions the structure that we actually have here and the structure that we're going to implement to be able to change the way that Philippine politics is run and the way that the Filipinos actually feel about politics at the end of the day. We want to encourage their participation in government and we want to make them feel that their voice has a say in the government and that they do make a change at the end of the day to how decisions are made. We question whether the government is able to adapt to the changing public sentiments and whether the government is able to ensure continuity in, the quality of life and the way the economy is addressed. No, thank you. We have to take a look at how, when you have the parliamentary system and when you have a prime minister who is in so much a poster boy or a poster lady, we have that particular public sentiment always manifested in that person. So much that the legislation is attributed to this one person. But other than just the public feeling that they trust these particular people in power to make the decisions for them, we say that it's important for people under him directly, being the members of parliament, to have a direct say in how they feel this person is running the job. We say that it has to be flexible enough to incorporate not only public opinion, but also to incorporate the opinions that should be valued of these ministers that are in parliament. Their particular opinion counts and their opinion matters, and it has to be manifested in a way that it automatically has an effect on the way the government is run. We say that this highlights the vote of no confidence in that it's a capacity to pressure the government to shape up at the end of the day, or it's actually a reassurance that he's doing a good job. So we say that it's important for this to be present to facilitate the growth and at least the moving on of this person to actually just go beyond the ideas of getting support or not, or being able to forward legislation that he knows will be supported by everyone at the end of the day. We say that it's beneficial to the certain point that is integral to the idea of good governance, as was already discussed in the opening part of the government's case. And we say that we should value ministers' opinion and actually assume that they have national interests at the end of the day. With regards to actually having a system that facilitates the best particular political culture for the Philippines, we say that it has to be in an avenue where there are people that know what they're doing, put in power, and trusted by not only the people at the end of the day in the grassroots level, but also the peers that decide and have the best capacity to decide that this is the person that's right for the job. And confidence asserts that. Thank you.
Let's hear the last speaker for this match, the opposition whip, Judilyn Sison.
Ladies and gentlemen, the debate for today is whether or not the vote of no confidence makes a more effective government, especially in the context of the Philippines. According to the government side, we need an answer that is readily available once discontent is already present within the government. That rests on the premise that expediency is a good thing, Mr. Speaker, and we say and we question why. Because according to our side, when it comes to serious decision, we need contemplation. We don't want knee-jerk reaction at the end of the day, even if they say that this happens every 6 months. We say that confidence does not necessarily translate to competence. And if we try to nuance this in the Philippines, we say that the reason why we're going to adopt a parliamentary form of government is to get away with the idea of having popularity as a criteria in establishing the competence of a person. We say, Mr. Speaker, that if with the vote of no confidence, we encounter the same pitfall that we are trying to avoid when we adopt the type of parliamentary system. Let us talk about 3 things in this debate. First, let's talk about the issue of accountability. Let's ask whether or not the mechanism of checks and balances presented by the government is enough to exact responsibility with the persons involved. Secondly, let's discuss the effects of this to government processes. Let's question whether or not this facilitates accomplishments of government tasks at the end of the day. And lastly, let's talk about societal implications. Let's ask whether or not this encourages mass action to resolution of problem. On the first issue, on the issue of accountability, whether or not the mechanism of checks and balances is adequate to exact responsibility. According to their side, accountability is about giving the sense of threat to these politicians that, you're going to be removed if you don't perform well. Not only is that a flawed idea, Mr. Speaker, because a person should be accountable by the mere fact that he has responsibility to the public because it is something that is inherent to his position. We question the exclusivity of that idea, Mr. Speaker, because we say that the threat of removal is also present in the system of impeachment. Even if we assume that popularity is an important criteria as well, we say that popularity is something that you also achieve when you have poll votes, Mr. Speaker, and members of this House. But we say that that is wrong because equating popularity with competence is something that we don't want at the end of the day. If in the status quo, popularity stands for something symbolic, we say that we don't want to concretize that idea, Mr. Speaker and members of this House. Because according to my first speaker, this leads to politicizing. And I say that this has 2 effects. Number 1, the focus on appeasing the parliament and not, responding to what the people really want. And according to them, they responded by saying that, we can't really avoid those personal interests. But the question, how do you lessen that with a vote of no confidence, no response coming from their side of the House? The second effect, Mr. Speaker, is that, it removes the people that they don't want, and we say that that kind of checks and balances is something that is retaliatory and something that is not beneficial at the end of the day. We say that checks and balances doesn't assure the competence of the individual or the individuals that will actually replace the person that you're going to remove, Mr. Speaker, and members of this House. And they can't simply divorce national interest from self-interest because, although that's ideal, Mr. Speaker, we don't see that in the Philippines. Because I conclude by saying that accountability is not about doing what is popular, but doing what is right and being responsible for the action and the consequences of those decisions, no matter how unpopular this may seem. Yes.
The threat exists to these particular chief executives is greater because in the system, we allow for it to be done without having to go through many of the processes required in impeachment.
Well, expediency, Mr. Speaker, I say does not necessarily equate to a greater threat. Because we tell you, Mr. Speaker, that threat per se has a value, and you also achieve that in the mechanisms that is already present in the status quo. And I don't really know how their paradigm is any different. The second idea, Mr. Speaker, is the effects of this to the governance. When you ask whether or not we facilitate accomplishments of tasks, the first idea, Mr. Speaker, is the idea of how it becomes a tedious process that taxes on the strength of the government, how it depletes resources. And according to my second speaker, this is something that the Philippines cannot afford given its current situation. What was the response, Mr. Speaker? They never rebutted that idea, so I say, Mr. Speaker, that stands. The second idea, Mr. Speaker, is the sustainability of reforms. When the first speaker talked about how you need the proponent to pursue a certain policy so that implementation would take place, Mr. Speaker, we also didn't hear any response coming from their side of the House. But more than the idea that you need the proponent there is the idea on how you actually need not shift focus from, implementing policies towards, ousting certain leaders that you don't want to exist within the parliament. We say that the focus of the people should be on benefiting the public and not, ousting people that they don't want within the very system where they actually exist. The last idea is the idea of societal implication. Let's ask whether or not this encourages mass action to resolution of the problem. According to them, because you have a very long process of the impeachment, you encourage mass action coming from the people, and they resort to unconstitutional means. We question the exclusivity of that paradigm, Mr. Speaker, because we say that if the people don't actually concur to what the majority in the parliament wants, we say that that could also lead to mass action.
Thank you very much, Opposition Whip. I enjoyed that debate tremendously, and I hope you enjoyed it too. It is up to you to decide which side won that debate. We don't call a winner here. We leave it up to you. So I'd like to congratulate both teams for debating well. You may now cross the House.
Okay, 60 minutes is up at tapos na naman po ang isang very interesting, very enlightening debate dito po sa Youth Voice. Matanong muna natin si Commissioner Dino, ano ang inputs, anong masasabi mo sa assessment mo sa ating naging debate tonight?
Sobrang mainit na talagang gustong-gusto nila na yung vote of no confidence, wag katakutan, o kaya yung kabila naman, dapat katakutan dahil magastos.
Ganon.
At syempre, it will give them more instability sa mga panahon na politika. Pero I think ngayong gabi, lahat yun na-cover natin. We gave them a picture of accountability, of governance. I'm sure may desisyon ng ating mga
Yan, ang ating mga televiewers. May nakuhang mga puntos ngayong gabi. Ikaw naman.
I agree.
Attorney Mark.
Maganda dahil dito nga sa Youth Voice, we don't decide who won the match. So ang objective talaga natin for this show is to inform the public kung ano yung mga issues surrounding the topic that we have chosen. So I really loved it that government was able to present clearly kung ano yung advantages ng vote of no confidence at yung opposition naman napakita yung mga dapat nating katakutan at dapat bantayan at dapat ingatan. So I hope you were educated.
Yung nanonood din ng mga legislators, di ba?
Yes.
Nandiyan dyan nanonood ngayon. Nakita nyo rin kung ano yung maganda, ano yung pinapaboran din, ano yung nakikita din ng taong bayan na mahalaga para sa kanila na dapat alagaan din natin. Okay? So, yan po. Naka-wrap up na naman tayo ng isang debate hour dito po sa ating programa. Sa ngalan po ni Chairman Richie Nalupta na nagpapagaling po, get well soon, Chairman, and we hope to see you next week. Ito po inyong mga lingkod. Ito po si Attorney Mark. At si
Commissioner Dina Badilla.
At Angelique Laza na naman po. Wishing you to join us next week, Sabado, alas 7 ng gabi dito po sa NBN4. Tandaan, dinggin po ang boses ng mga kabataan dito lamang sa Youth Voice!